everybody, it's Karen Bentley here with the Sugarfreeadvantage channel, your resource for healthy weight loss and healthy living on a sugar-free, low-carb or keto eating strategy. And today we're going to be talking about the very controversial topic of food addiction or binge eating disorder. It's known by the acronym BED, B for binge, E for eating, D for disorder, food addiction or BED. And why is it controversial? Well, for one thing, there's no common agreement that there even is such a thing as food addiction. There's no diagnostic test. There's no blood measurement you can take. There's no tool that measures food addiction. And so there's no common agreement because of that about whether or not food addiction exists. There is a questionnaire put out by Yale Research that you can answer, and you can tally up your results and decide if you're a binge eater or a food addict or not. But it's my suggestion that you don't need a test. You don't need a professional assessment. You don't need anyone to tell you because you already know the answer. There are only two kinds of people in the world. There are people who can eat one Oreo and be happy, or there can be people who need the whole bag and still be unhappy. There are people who can eat one handful of chips and be happy, or there are people who have to have the whole bag or two or three to be happy. And if you're in the second group, if you need to gorge yourself, if you can't get happy no matter how much food you're eating, you know it. You know it. You don't need no stinking test. You're living it. You're living with it. And so this video is for you. And what I'm here to suggest is that this is a problem that requires extra patience and extra compassion for self, because food is very, very tricky. You can't just give it up. You know, like alcohol or smoking or substances, you can't just do without. You actually have to feed yourself to live. And so it's really tricky. And once you learn a couple of secrets, it stops being so tricky and it gets easier for you. So there's lots of hope and there's lots of help. Stay tuned and we'll get to that, okay? I promise. The other reason it's controversial is because it's not a well-researched or well-studied topic. We don't even know, for example, the size of the population group that's affected. I've read widely different ranges of estimates. The low end of the range is that there's 5% of the adult population in the United States is affected by food addiction or binge eating disorder, and that would be roughly 13 million people. On the high end, I've read that it could be as high as 70 million people. And in between, I've read that it's 50% of who's ever on a diet right now. So who knows? Nobody really knows. Nobody's measuring, nobody's tracking, nobody's studying. We're on our own, folks, okay? And the other reason it's controversial is because what causes it is also unknown. The good news is that the solution is the same no matter what causes it. So we're going to use the same solution no matter what the cause. But let's just look at the causes, for example, what they might be. One is maybe you have the addiction gene. There's a so-called, addiction gene, or maybe you learned a certain lifestyle from your parents, a behavior. Maybe mommy and daddy didn't love you enough. Maybe you're suffering from a sexual or emotional trauma, or you've been a victim of some kind of crime. Maybe you're in between a rock and a hard spot in your life and you just need the coping device of food to feel better. And, maybe it's all of those or some of those or a combination, or maybe it's something else altogether. And that's what I'd like to pose to you today, the possibility that the way that we're feeding ourselves and the foods that we're feeding ourselves and when we're feeding ourselves have a big influence, a profound influence on hunger, on mood, on depression, on energy, on everything about the quality of your life can be influenced by the foods that you put in your mouth. And so there is hope and there is help, because you can change rather quickly how you feed yourself and what you feed yourself. And it can be the miracle that you're looking for. And what I wanted to talk to you about today is 2 studies on starvation and one explanation of this word, polyphasia, which is excessive hunger that troubles diabetics. So the 2 studies on starvation come from this book, Good Calories, Bad Calories, by a guy by the name of Gary Taubes. And this is a great book, but I would only recommend it to you if you like nerdy stuff, if you have a scientific appetite. But it's great. It's got good information in it. And he talks about these 2 starvation studies. You know, not many people are doing starvation studies because people don't want to starve. And maybe it's not the most moral or ethical thing to ask people to go on a starvation study and treat them like guinea pigs. But anyways, the first one was done just about 100 years ago in 1917. It was done by the Carnegie Institution of Washington's Nutrition Laboratory. They took 12 young men and they put them on a diet of 1,400 calories a day, which at the time was considered a starvation diet. The men complained of constant hunger. The men complained of constantly being cold. And in fact, no matter how many clothes they put on, they just couldn't get warm. And at the end of the starvation experiment, it was determined that their metabolism had decreased by 30% on average. And then the thing that's really interesting to me is that just 3 weeks after the study was done, just 3 weeks, not only had all the weight been regained, but on average, the men put on 8 pounds each, which is quite astounding. The second study was done in 1944 at the University of Minnesota, and it was headed by a guy named Ancel Keys, and you might know his name. Ancel Keys became very famous, worldwide fame for a researcher for bringing the lipid theory to light. And the lipid theory is the fat theory. Lipid is another word for fat. And the theory is that the fat that goes in through your lips ends up on your hips. That makes you fat. And it clogs up your arteries and it gives you heart disease. That is the lipid theory, and that is care of this guy named Ancel Keys. So if you believe that, you can thank him. And he also did this starvation study. It was in 1944, and he took 32 conscientious objectors of World War II, and he handpicked these guys for their strength of character, for their strong wills, because he wanted that kind of person in his study. And what he did was he put them on a starvation diet for 24 weeks. And in this case, it was a 1,600 calorie a day diet, about 1,600 calories a day. And he fed them 2 meals a day, so about 800 calories a meal. And what he served them was whole wheat bread and potatoes and cereal and turnips and cabbage and just a token bit of dairy and meat. And at the end of the study, the men had lost 1/2 of their body fat, which is pretty remarkable. But he also found that they had a loss of ambition, that they had depression, irritability, loss of sex drive. They had constant complaints of ravenous hunger, and they were obsessed with food. Food quickly became the subject of conversations and daydreams. When Ancel Keys and his research team relaxed the dietary restrictions, the hunger remained unappeased. Hunger remained unappeased. Depression deepened. Their food intake rose to the prodigious level of 8,000 calories a day. And the point is that the adverse effects caused by semi-starvation diets as a treatment for obesity has been under-noticed, under-acknowledged. And my suggestion is that we are doing this to ourselves. We don't need Ansel Keys or some other researchers to do studies on us. We routinely put ourselves on 1,400 calorie diets and 1,600 calorie diets and expect them to work, and then wonder why we're crazy with food. If you can turn 32 strong-willed men into crazy food-obsessed maniacs, you can be turned into a crazy food-obsessed maniac too, just by the way you feed yourself. And that means there's hope, because you can change the way that you feed yourself. You can change it today. You can change it tomorrow. You can change it for the rest of your life. It can be the best thing that ever happened to you, because when you change the way that you eat, you can also change your propensity to get every major disease that you don't want. And that includes obesity. It includes type 2 diabetes. It includes cardiovascular disease. It includes some cancers. It includes Alzheimer's. It includes a lot others, but those are the biggies. And you can not only change your obsession with food, but you can change your proclivity to have those kinds of diseases. So right now, let's talk a little bit about polyphasia, which is excessive hunger. And let me read to you so I get it exactly right. Polyphasia is the medical term for excessive hunger, and it's one of the 3 well-established signs of diabetes. The cause of polyphasia is especially troublesome because the more you eat, the higher your blood sugar becomes, and then the stronger your excessive hunger becomes too. High blood sugar levels directly increase your craving for food, and in particular, sugar, because your body relies on the second-by-second delivery of glucose in order to function. When there isn't enough insulin present to actually make use of and transport that glucose to your brain and other cells throughout your body, your brain cues its signal for hunger. And again, it's a vicious cycle, because the more you eat, the higher your blood sugar becomes, the more intense your cravings for sugar becomes. And if you think back to that second starvation study that I talked to you about, what did Ansel Keys feed those guys? He fed them bread, which converts to high blood sugar, higher blood sugar than table sugar from bread. And he fed them potatoes, which converts to high blood sugar, higher than table sugar. And he fed them cereal, another high blood sugar food. And what did those guys do? They turned into obsessive, craving, food-loving maniacs, food-eating maniacs, because they were eating the foods that quickly convert to sugar in your blood. And it had a profound impact on them, on their mood, and on their obsessing. And I suggest that it has the same impact on you. All you have to do is to become aware of the 3 types of food that are most likely to influence your blood sugar. And that is anything made with a caloric sweetener. And what's a caloric sweetener? Well, the most popular one is, of course, sugar. But there's also high fructose corn syrup and maple syrup and agave syrup and honey. Anything that's a sweetening agent that has calories is a caloric sweetener. And that sugar is going to go right into your blood. The second type of food is anything made with a highly processed flour. So that highly processed flour is going to convert quickly to sugar in your blood. And the third thing that's going to convert quickly is a starch, like potatoes, which is everybody's favorite starch. That's going to convert to high blood sugar quickly too. So we have caloric sweeteners, processed flours, starches. Those are the 3 types of foods you need to become aware of to start to get a handle on your craziness with food, your high blood sugar, and obsessing and being hungry, and everything that you don't want is just from a simple awareness of those 3 types of foods. I hope this gives you some hope. I hope it gives you some help. And please come back. I'm going to talk about this some more with more specific direction. Until then, hang in there, start reading food labels, and don't give up. If 32 conscientious objectors can be turned into crazy men, you can too, just by the food that you eat, and you can fix this problem. You created it. Come back for some more. Bye for now.